The way we move from A to B has to change. Last year, on average, in Brussels, each of us spent one working week stuck in congestion each year. There's also a big economic impact. GDP impact of up to 8 billion per year in Belgium, and also a societal impact. The transport sector is the only sector to have seen an increase in CO2 emissions since 1990, and it's still seen CO2 growing by 18% during that time frame. So the way we move from A to B has to change, but the way we move from A to B is changing. The future of mobility is here. What do we mean by that? First of all, we're seeing a shift from car-centric to user-centric. The reason that many of us own a car is to guarantee the ability to get from A to B. But your car is stuck, parked, not moving 96% of the time. And we're seeing, like in any other industry, a rise in disruptive technologies, digital technologies that are enabling new ways for people to plan, book, and pay for their travel, moving towards a world where more of your travel is shared and more of your travel is multimodal. We also see a shift in powertrain, a shift from diesel and petrol, which has been driving our cars for so long, towards electric powertrains. Electric is really at a tipping point. Already this year, 14% of vehicles, of company cars sold within Belgium are electric. And we project that by the end of the decade, over 42% of all passenger cars sold in Western Europe will be electric, and is likely to be even higher in Belgium. So we're seeing these big shifts in the way that in the future of mobility, and the time to change is now. And we look at it from a multiple different perspectives. First of all, in terms of employees. Employees are demanding change, wanting more choice, wanting more flexibility. Nearly a third of Belgian employees see mobility as a critical issue, and are also nearly half of Belgian consumers wanting to move away from petrol and diesel towards new powertrains. And that trend is those numbers from Belgium, but those trends apply across Europe and across the world. We also see from political agenda, the policymakers, acceleration of the Green Deal announced last week by President von der Leyen, for example, around the acceleration of 55% reduction in carbon emissions across the EU by 2030. So really driving that shift towards increasing electrification. 4 out of the 5 biggest markets in Europe are looking to put in place bans on petrol and diesel vehicles and introduce new compulsory electric vehicles. In Belgium, for example, around making company cars compulsory as of 2026, and also looking at other models, such as on the mobility budget for all. Employers are increasingly seeing this as a way to improve their talent proposition and moving towards new future-proof mobility. Many more companies seeing it as an important part of a talent acquisition, talent retention, as well as a way to fulfill their sustainability ambitions. And this is all made possible because of the innovators, these connected, autonomous, shared and electric technologies that are the backbone of the way that the transport ecosystem will work, but also more and more B2B mobility solutions that are providing, for example, mobility as a service, helping people to plan, book and pay for multimodal travel. End-to-end electric vehicle leasing solutions. So no longer just leasing a car, but also making electric charging solutions available, bicycle leasing schemes, etc. So there's new solutions available to be able to transform your corporate mobility. But there's an elephant in the room, COVID-19. Aside from healthcare, very few sectors have been impacted as much as mobility and our freedom to move from A to B. So what does the new normal look like for COVID-19? That's the question that many of us have been asking. We've done a survey of 15,000 consumers worldwide every 2 weeks to understand how consumer attitudes towards transport and mobility have been changing as a result of COVID-19. We combined that with a survey of 40 interviews with 40 different stakeholders and leaders across the mobility ecosystem, transport providers, policymakers, etc., to see and understand what the future of mobility would look like as a result of COVID-19. What did we learn? 42% of consumers are planning to avoid public transport in the short term as a result of the virus, and 2/3 of mobility leaders believe that change will last for 2 to 3 years. So something quite fundamental about the way that people are going to be choosing to go from A to B. There's some upsides. So we've seen a dramatic uptake. Bicycle usage, for example, has gone up by 50% during the time period, but certainly something to take into account. And so that's where this additional new trend in terms of corporate mobility becomes even more important, from fixed options towards more flexible options. 45% of employees have found working from home easier as a result or during the COVID-19 crisis. And 2/3 of those believe that is because of their commutes. So they are enjoying the fact that they are working from home. And 84% of employees want to continue working remotely post-COVID-19. So when developing your future of mobility strategy, your corporate mobility strategy, you need to look for ways to embed flexible options and remote working as part of that solution. So with that context in mind, ask the question, how to transform your corporate mobility. Timothy.
Thank you, Alex. And before we really dive into the details of how you can actually transform your corporate mobility program, let us have a quick look at the reasons why we actually see companies making that shift today. Well, first of all, Alex already alluded to it and mentioned it, that even before COVID-19, over 1/3 of employees were actually naming their home work commute as a big issue. And with actually the major benefits of working more from home being exactly the ability to avoid that same home work commute, it's no surprise that the talent agenda is one of the clear drivers to transform your corporate mobility program. Next to that, with actually the broader societal trend we see on sustainability, the more and more government ambitions in the same area, it is also no surprise that more and more companies are actually identifying a couple of sustainability goals as part of their strategic focus. And corporate mobility is then often part of that. And then lastly, we also have cost as a clear driver. But cost have a number of different angles to it. First of all, cost links back actually to the talent agenda. If you're not actually transforming your corporate mobility now, you will feel the impact of it on your future recruitment and retention of that top talent. Secondly, if we look at cost on the different side of the perspective, you sometimes also have companies who make the active decision to invest in a corporate mobility program. And then a third angle to cost, and that is what we see most often today, is really cost as an element as an impact of the legislative agenda, and the transformation of the corporate mobility program as actually a need to stay ahead of that legislative agenda. Now, if we really have a look at what we are seeing on the market today, in the market today we really see companies with different maturity of mobility programs. And if we would map that out on a horizontal axis, going from left to right, from low maturity of the program to high maturity of the program, first of all, we see companies taking that initial early steps, really looking and working on transforming the car policy. So moving away from the classic powertrains with petrol and diesel engines to actually more plug-in hybrids or electric vehicles, but also rationalizing the policy further to make sure that the vehicle that is provided is actually fit for purpose and perfectly fits that particular user case of that particular employee. And then if we move more to the right, we also see a lot of companies already adding a number of different mobility options to their car policy, offering access to their employees to public transport, bicycles, sometimes already making use of legislative proposals that are already, or legislative frameworks that are already in force, like the mobility budget, but sometimes also using flexible benefit schemes to offer the same mobility options for all employees. And then if we move all the way to the right, we really have those holistic mobility programs that are very much user-centric, digitally enabled, and are about shared and electric transport modes. Now, only very few companies have already completed the journey to move all the way to the right and have already a holistic mobility program in force today. Obviously, when you start the journey and you move from the left to the right on that axis, the impact you will have on each of the different drivers we mentioned, on talent, on sustainability, and on cost will increase. And once you have established a holistic mobility program, you are more in an ability to really use it for your employer branding and attract that top talent going forward. You will be in a position to actually measure your success from a sustainability ambition, and also be able to be very vocal about it. And then obviously, if you have been able to inject that choice and flexibility in the program that is so much needed going forward, you will have that agility to also stay ahead of the legislative agenda. Now, in making that transition from the left and the right, we still see companies really struggling. Now, the reason for that is quite often that they lack actually a clear vision around where they want to go in the long run with their corporate mobility program. And also because corporate mobility is by definition a cross-functional effort. So this is why we really put forward 8 different building blocks to make your corporate mobility program a success. And in actually going through those 8 different building blocks, you will be in a position to clearly define your strategic direction for your corporate mobility program and align on the approach to be used. You will be able to build the right infrastructure and to actually make sure that you also capture that in proper guidelines for the employees and other stakeholders. And finally, you will be able to realize that model shift through a proper change management program along with it. And if we very briefly go through the 8 building blocks, you see that we start actually with defining a clear vision that allows you to communicate better on the program, but also to define some guiding principles that can then be used as a compass throughout the entire project and towards during that entire transformation. With that, you will also be able to clearly articulate what success means for your company in terms of corporate mobility. And then with that vision, we also enrich the discussion typically with the data that is available at your company in terms of demographics, in terms of mobility solutions already offered, in terms of locations of the different sites within the country, to really get a clear view on the mobility potential for your employees in function of your particular situation as a company. And then obviously you need to add a bit of legislative perspective to that. The legislative perspective that very often will also help drive the timeline of your corporate mobility transformation, but also with the aim to measure the impact for the employee and measure the impact for the company from a cost perspective. And actually, after having gone through those 3 first building blocks, you will be in a position to then look at what are now really the proper mobility solutions for my employees, whereby parking can quite often be a different building block to be looked at. And from that, define really a first prototype of a corporate mobility program for the future, to then start looking really on how to operationalize that. And look at the tool and enablers, and then look at the policies and procedures that are needed to put that into practice. And then last but not least, an absolutely crucial element of it is then the communication and the change management program that comes with it. Now, if you hear all of this and you look at those 8 building blocks, what does that actually mean for you as an HR leader, and how can you actually impact that discussion? Now, from the projects we have dealt with and clients we have helped in that transformation, we actually want to leave you with 6 golden rules where you as an HR professional can have an impact on this corporate mobility transformation. First of all, as mentioned, it is a cross-functional effort, so make sure that as of the outset you are building a cross-functional team to help you deliver and run this project. Secondly, you need to acknowledge the fact that we all need to start moving differently from A to B. So make sure that you build a proper understanding of the state of mobility in your organization, and that you are in a position to measure the employee behavior of your employees to be able to manage it and influence it going forward. Then thirdly, and very importantly, COVID-19 has accelerated the future of work, and corporate mobility is part of that. So address that elephant in the room and make sure you evaluate the longer term benefits of remote working to make sure you can tie that together to the sustainability ambitions of your company to be in a position to clearly articulate a common vision around corporate mobility for your organization. Now, number 4, as mentioned, the broader societal expectations, the expectations from your employees, and actually the legislative agenda will continue evolving going forward. So make sure that in designing your corporate mobility package, you are in a position to be very agile. So build in the necessary choice and flexibility. Then number 5, make sure that you allow your employees to test a number of different mobility options. Mobility is something that is very personal and will be experienced differently by each and every employee. So make sure that you allow them to test those mobility options and then focus on actually reinforcing positive behavior and a continuous activation of your corporate mobility program. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, make sure that you practice what you preach. Really, active and visible support for leadership is essential for a successful transformation of a corporate mobility program. And with those 6 golden rules, we will leave you and we will open the floor for questions. Thank you.